John Frost, who stands charged with the crime of high treason.
Welcome to Watch Mojo UK, and today we're counting down 30 of the most shocking and surprising revelations on Who Do You Think You Are?
It's practically a line from Hamlet.
Before we begin, we publish new content every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.
Number 30. Michelle Keegan's Suffragette.
So suffragette came from the term suffragist. So if you were a suffragist, you were a woman fighting for the vote.
During her episode, Michelle Keegan was surprised to find that her grandmother's birth had been entered into records by a registrar named E. Pankhurst. Yes, Emmeline Pankhurst herself worked in the area and had already begun organising through the WSPU. Keegan only has one question though. Was her great-great-grandmother a suffragette?
She was a suffragist?
Elizabeth was a suffragist.
No way! So she was involved in this campaign?
She was involved in this campaign.
She does some more digging, learning about the militant tactics the suffragettes employed, and eventually finds out that yes, her great-great-grandmother, Elizabeth Curwen, operated as a suffragette full-time. They found out because she'd written it in the census as a point of protest. Of course, the suffragettes were ultimately successful, thanks to women like Elizabeth.
She saw it as her occupation to be a suffragist, to fight for women to win the vote.
No way!
She fought for votes for women.
Number 29. Martin Freeman's Mysterious Deaths.
The general rule is that wherever you see a big gap in a family,
you
have to think that it might be syphilis.
Shortly before his big break in Sherlock, Martin Freeman appeared on Who Do You Think You Are to learn why he had so many missing family members and why some of those who survived had gone blind.
And then you've lost 1, 2, 3, 4 that you know about.
Yes.
And possibly 2 other children, all of them early deaths.
Yes.
He talks to a historian who reveals that there was most likely a disturbing reason for all this tragedy. Syphilis was extremely common and largely incurable before the discovery of penicillin, and as well as leading to the tragic deaths of Martin's ancestors, is also a likely cause of the blindness. More shocking though, they eventually learned that Ada probably contracted it through congeniality when she was born, and also years later, leading to the deaths of her own children.
Most people who had syphilis didn't realise it and passed it on unknowingly.
Number 28. Joe Lysets' chimney sweep.
So boys were chosen to climb the chimneys because of their size. He would use his knees and his hands. His hands would be cupped to the inside of the flue wall.
Brummie comedian Joe Lycett learnt a lot during his episode, but most harrowing was this discovery, that one of his ancestors was a chimney sweep. As much as you may think you know about chimney sweeps, it turns out that the truth of how they lived is even more distressing.
At first, they will come back from their work with their arms and knees streaming with blood.
It was extremely dangerous work that remained commonplace in Britain for hundreds of years, until eventually being abolished in the 1870s as compulsory education laws were brought in simultaneously. The most shocking moment, however, was when Lycett was told that his ancestor may have cleaned the exact chimney in the stately home he was visiting, as he worked there.
Quite easily have been up that chimney.
It's quite believable to think he went up these chimneys, yeah.
Wow. Oh my word. I feel uncomfortable about it for some reason.
Number 27. Rupert Everett's con artist.
And here in, I think 1862 is another reference to him dealing or brokering gold mining in Wales.
Why did Rupert Everett's great-great-grandfather leave the country? Well, it turns out that he was caught up in a banking scandal, accused of defrauding investors by selling them shares in a silver mine. Incidents like this were far more common in the 19th century, and Frederick Everett was ultimately put on trial for fraud.
Charge of fraud against a stockbroker. Yesterday, Mr. Frederick Everett, a stockbroker, again appeared before the Lord Mayor.
He was eventually acquitted, but declared bankrupt, and was never able to work as a stockbroker in the City of London again.
Investors were encouraged to direct their money into speculative schemes, with little official oversight.
So, this fall from grace was what led Everett's great-grandfather, also called Frederick, to run away from his destitute family and go to sea. Number 26. Clare Foy and a tragic river death.
It proved to be the jersey of one of the missing men, and the body, on being set loose, from the sticks in which it had been entangled rose to the surface.
Few things are as disturbing as going to the place where one of your ancestors died, but that's what Clare Foy went through during her episode. She walked the length of the river where, during a cross-country race, there was a tragic accident in which her great-great-grandfather sadly lost his life. Of 16 men who went out on what was meant to be a simple race, 2 were married, and those 2 were, horrifically, the ones who drowned.
By the clothing and the red jersey and knickerbockers, it was identified as Private Stimpson, one of the 2 married men who drowned.
Worse, Claire found the very spot in the river where they went in, and then where the bodies were found, and realised that if anybody had been watching, they could have been rescued.
I think it's even sadder because it's 400 yards from where they went in.
Number 25, Cheryl's forgotten war hero.
I find it pretty amazing that my mum's grandfather has been completely forgotten, considering he fought in the First World War.
There were a lot of revelations in Cheryl's episode, including the big initial one that there was a secret side to her family that her mother never met. She learnt that Joseph Wilson Ridley, her great-grandfather, was a soldier, but that nobody liked to speak about him.
Joseph was never really discussed in our family, other than referenced in rather derogatory terms as Old Man Ridley.
Contacted anonymously for the programme, a relative sent a letter explaining to Cheryl that Ridley was known to be a violent drunk, and that after Ridley's first wife died, with whom he had 8 children, he shacked up with somebody else, his housekeeper. His children with the housekeeper are Cheryl's ancestors, and he was written off by his other family, despite his service in the war.
A Ridley trait is that most of us have a quick temper, and from what I've been told, Grandad Ridley was no exception. Some in the family say he was troubled and volatile, and his temper would often be fueled by excessive drinking.
Number 24, Daniel Radcliffe's wartime love story.
No one can say to you, Ernie, that you were going with a flirt, for I love you, Ernie, with all my heart, and will till death do us part.
Another wartime tragedy. Daniel Radcliffe uncovered these letters between his great-great-uncle Ernie and his sweetheart, Jeanie. Ernie and his brothers went off to fight in the war, but the letters from Ernie stopped in 1916. Tragically, despite getting married and writing home diligently, Ernie was the only one of the 4 McDowell brothers who died in the war.
Yeah. There's Ernie. Ernest McDowell.
Radcliffe also reads a letter about Ernie's death in which the family was informed of the details of his last moments. It's likely that most people in the UK, and indeed most of Europe, have family who died in the First World War. Ernie was hit with a stray shell.
We were just after arriving in the trenches, and your boy and 2 more chaps from Belfast was going into a dugout to take off their packs when a shell landed.
Number 23, Rosie Ellis's nosy neighbours.
The vent were very drunk, and he came up to him and slapped him in the face.
There was lots of drama in Rose Ellis's family history, which she likened to EastEnders, the show that made her famous. The first shocking moment was when Alfred Chilton, her great-great-grandfather, slapped a customer during a drunken incident. Elsewhere, though, there was a story about her family being squatters and getting into trouble, which turned out to be partially a myth.
But they're not squatting because they rented.
You're right, they were paying rent.
They actually weren't squatting, but were in bother with the neighbours for being too noisy. There was an official complaint about the children being rowdy by accidentally kicking a ball over a wall, which led to their eviction.
Requirement on the neighbour had failed to prove any evidence of disturbance. Indeed, the evidence available goes to show that the Willis family are in bed at 10 o'clock at night.
Number 22, Julie Walters' family farms.
They were tenants, what we call tenants at will, so they didn't have a lease.
Travelling to Ireland, Julie Walters found out a lot about her ancestors' history as tenant farmers. With the whole country owned by English landowners at the time, Irish farmers were left struggling to survive and constantly under threat of eviction.
There's an awful lot of tenant farmers buried here, but they wouldn't have any money to erect a headstone. So his grave is unmarked.
But her ancestor Anthony Clark was one of many people campaigning to get these laws changed, but then he got an assault charge after allegedly attacking a 75-year-old man. The man died, and Clark was temporarily charged with murder until it was determined that he died of a stroke. Regardless, Clark didn't get the chance to buy his family's land before he died himself. The entire saga was shocking to unearth.
One of the great sadnesses of this story is that Anthony Clark died without being able to buy his land.
Number 21. Emma Willis's political attack.
And on the very instant that they appeared, they were knocked down and received many desperate stabs.
Another celebrity who found out she was Irish was Emma Willis, who also went across the sea to investigate her family's connection to Ireland's colonial past. She disturbingly found out that one of her ancestors was accused of attempted murder after a late-night attack on a man and his son.
Because it's hard, after reading this, to think he was a good man.
The motive for the crime was political, with her ancestor, Richard Fowler, a member of the Orange Order. Willis was highly unsettled upon learning the details of the violent attack, though was grateful that the victims, Michael and Thomas Egan, survived their injuries. This was despite being set upon by multiple men wielding bayonets.
I felt quite sick when I was reading it, because it's so detailed.
Number 20. Leslie Garrett and the possible poisoning.
Death from poisoning by carbolic acid, accidentally administered. Oh, for goodness sake. Wow. By whom?
Perhaps more shocking than the story itself was singer Leslie Garrett's overjoyed reaction to the fact that her great-great-grandmother died after ingesting carbolic acid. Contemporary news reports and the death certificate said that the carbolic acid, which was a commonly used disinfectant, was administered accidentally to Mary Ann Garrett.
The medicine bottle was also on the mantel shelf, and it too was labelled and similar in shape to the one containing the poison.
Though she only had a tablespoon of it and a doctor was sent for immediately, she died in a matter of minutes. Garrett talks to a pathologist who says that a tablespoon was more than enough, and that many people actually died the same way back when the substance was regularly kept in houses.
But people were very concerned about this. There were about 200 deaths a year due to carbolic acid swallowed.
Garrett still suspected that her great-granddad Charlie might have done it on purpose.
My great-grandfather just said sorry, gave her the wrong bottle, and he was believed.
Number 19. Kate Winslet's imprisoned relative.
So Anders stole.
Yeah, and why did he steal?
Because he was starving, and so were his children.
His child, the youngest child, had died, and so he needed food for his family.
She headed to Sweden to learn about her ancestry on her mother's side and her great-great-great-grandfather Anders Johnson. But she soon found out not only that one of his children died young, but that in 1832 he was arrested, along with another man, for stealing barrels of potatoes.
Good on you, Anders. I would have stolen the potatoes as well.
She then finds out that he was sent to prison for this, and that he sadly died in prison in a nearby castle.
Stated that he is 42 years old and has never been suspected of any crime. My God, so he was only a year younger than me.
She goes to the castle to talk to another historian about what happened, finding out that he'd stolen other things too, including some beehives full of honey. He was sentenced to be whipped, but died when he contracted typhus before the sentence was carried out.
Buried April the 3rd, arrested man Anders Johnson, 43 years old, died of nerve fever.
Number 18. Nigella Lawsons' vanished family.
It's very different from all those big Lions houses and everything, isn't it? So obviously a very small house, a lot of children, no money, no food, and no sanitary conditions.
It's no secret that Nigella Lawson, whose father was a peer in the House of Lords and whose mother was a restaurant heiress, came for money. But that isn't the entire story, as she learned when she investigated her roots.
I mean, in itself, it doesn't tell me that much, that 2 children have apparently vanished.
She found that she had Dutch ancestry and a lot of Jewish ancestry, but also that her great-great-grandfather, Barnet Salmon, grew up in poverty.
Barnet was determined to break away from the poverty of his background. He escaped the East End slums in his early 20s and began to build a reputation as a tobacco dealer.
In the 1840s, Salmon and his siblings lived in a tiny house in Spitalfields, London, where multiple children died of diseases related to malnutrition and unsanitary living. She found this out after 2 of the children disappeared from records, and she went searching for their death certificates to put the pieces together.
Asher died in March 42 and Harriet in November 42, so that's pretty near one another.
Number 17. Graeme Norton's shotgun wedding. Norton grew up in the Republic of Ireland, but his mother was Northern Irish and had roots in Belfast. So he headed across the border to learn about that side of the family, recalling childhood visits to Belfast during the Troubles as he went.
I loved going to Belfast because I loved my grandparents and stuff, but it was so scary.
He ran into trouble during the research though, because his great-grandmother had recorded 2 different maiden names on different documents. He wanted to know why, coming to suspect that she was illegitimate, and that's why she had no father listed on her marriage certificate.
That does really shock me, because even now you'd get a bit of a move on down the aisle.
But most shocking was learning that she was already 8 months pregnant when she walked down the aisle.
My grandmother would have been mortified if she'd known this. That her mother had been 8 months pregnant going down the aisle.
Number 16. Clare Balding's great-grandfather.
He's a very public figure, he's an MP, and he's clearly living a lifestyle that suggests he might be engaged in illegal acts.
Even more aristocratic than Nigella is Clare Balding. It's true that her lineage was even more well known before appearing on the show, and can eventually be traced back to Henry VII, disturbingly through more than one close relative.
These are all your Stanley family ancestors.
Bit overwhelming.
But the show focused largely on investigating her great-grandfather, Sir Malcolm Bullock, to determine whether or not he was gay.
And I think there he provides an opportunity for probably a group of gay men to basically socialise with each other.
Gosh, you just say that as if it's accepted fact. Group of gay MPs, Malcolm Bullock was one of them.
Bullock was an MP between the 1920s and 1950s, and there were always rumours that he was, but as Balding points out, at the time, it would have been a crime had he been discovered, and his career certainly would have ended, so it had to stay secret.
In my mind, there's no doubt that he was gay.
Number 15. Greg Davies' illegitimate ancestor.
So, William Owen is the name of my great-grandfather.
It would seem so, yes.
Though he grew up in Shropshire, Greg Davies' parents were both Welsh and drove him across the border so that he wouldn't be born in England. He found out that his great-grandmother hadn't been married to his great-grandfather, and their kids had been born out of wedlock.
That would have been a local scandal, do you think?
Yes, probably.
They weren't married?
No, they weren't, no. And they've had 2 children together.
She eventually took him to court to try and get the child support payments he owed her, but he didn't have any money.
And the reason he was never mentioned by our family is because no one, apart from Elizabeth, my great-grandmother, I don't think knew who he was.
He kept investigating William Owen, who turned out to have trouble with drink. He was even arrested at one point for being drunk and in charge of a horse and cart, as well as once attempting to climb Mount Snowdon in the middle of the night.
Mrs. Carroll said she could not say he was drunk, neither could she say he was sober, but he was more drunk than sober.
Number 14. Sarah Milliken and the Pegasus disaster.
It says, "It was our painful duty to announce the melancholy catastrophe, the loss of the Pegasus steamer."
None of Milliken's relatives died in the Pegasus disaster in 1843, but one ancestor, James, did work for a shipping company that employed him and others to retrieve things from shipwrecks. This included the grisly work of bringing bodies to the surface, which families of the deceased would give rewards for.
The surface of the water was covered in the dead and the dying. The screeching was fearful. Wow. That's horrific, isn't it?
The details of the disaster were harrowing, but more shocking is that an event like this could be so widely forgotten, buried in 19th century newspapers.
The divers have 40% on the value of all they bring up. It's described as melancholy work, wrenching open boxes and tearing out their saturated contents.
She read through advertisements placed offering cash rewards for the recovery of loved ones' remains in these disturbing scenes. Number 13. David Tennant's Orange Order relatives. Though he believed nearly his entire family came from Scotland, Tennant went off to Northern Ireland to meet the relatives of his maternal great-grandfather after losing the trail for the Scottish side of the family.
My father was
He was an orange man.
Oh, he was?
He was.
He was surprised to find out that his Northern Irish family weren't only Protestants, but that at least one of them had been an Orange man, a member of the notorious Orange Order. His relatives actually gave him one of the orange sashes they had, which shocked and disturbed him.
Was William in a lodge as well?
I don't know.
Right.
You could probably follow that through maybe through the Memorial Hall.
He found it hard to reconcile that his family could have belonged to the Orange Order, particularly during the Troubles.
How did you feel when you were handed that sash?
Not great. Even now, I'm not that comfortable holding it.
Number 12. Sheridan Smith and the alleged arsonist. This one was full of twists and turns, as Sheridan Smith went to Sheffield to unearth her family history.
Shortly before 4 o'clock this morning, a fire broke out on the premises of Mr. Doubleday, Woodman Inn, Sheffield Moor.
She was looking for information about her great-great-grandfather, Benjamin Doubleday, who tried to make it as a musician playing the banjo, but she found out that he had a number of suspicious arsons in his history.
It is, and he taught himself to bring up his kids and everything he's done for his family, that this now just seems like a different person.
A pub he owned actually burned down when the building was totally empty, leading investigators to suspect it was done for the insurance, charging him for it.
There's scarcely any furniture in any of the rooms. Doubleday was the only person on the premises. He was leaving the house this week, having removed most of his belongings.
But she kept digging and eventually learned that he was found not guilty, so hopefully that verdict was correct and he didn't start the fire. Number 11. Stephen Fry's wartime history.
Place of death, Auschwitz camp. So that's my grandfather's sister, my mother's aunt.
An immense tragedy was uncovered when Stephen Fry traced his roots, wanting to learn more about his Jewish heritage. It was difficult to watch him find out that some of his closest relatives, including his great-aunt, perished in Auschwitz during the war after being sent there by the Nazis.
So that's the other girl. That's Elisa. Date of death 44, Auschwitz camp.
His family didn't initially know exactly what had happened to them, only that they had been taken to Auschwitz and never heard from again, but presumably had died.
It's so stupid because I knew this. We all knew they'd died, at least believed it.
He had an old family photograph, and it was deeply heartbreaking putting faces to the names as he goes through the list of his cousins, most of whom died within the walls of the Nazis' most notorious camps. Number 10. Boris Johnson is related to King George II. As an old Etonian and Oxbridge graduate, it shouldn't really come as a surprise that Boris Johnson is posh enough to be related to royalty.
So she is, of course, Augusta Caroline, Princess of Brunswick.
Oh, yes, he rings a bell.
And the wonderful thing is her mother is...
Her mother is... Oh, look at this, Augusta Hanover.
But back in 2008, he was notable as one of the first celebs to find a King of England in his family tree. Turns out that Johnson is directly descended from King George II. For those who don't know their horrible history songs, he was the bad one. King George was a Hanoverian, so an ancestor of our current royal family. That means that Boris is distantly related to the Queen, the Swedish and Dutch royals, and even the Romanovs.
I guess I always thought of myself, and always thought of our family as being basically a bunch of Turkish, Jewish, mixed with this weird granny butter Baron de Pfeffel stuff. So I always felt a bit of a, as I say, the product of incomers, product of newcomers to Britain.
Number 9. Mark Wright didn't expect the Spanish Inquisition. Towie star Mark Wright has always believed that his blood was Italian. Turns out, that was a myth. The family was Spanish, hailing from Jaén in Andalusia. Mark discovered that their roots were also Jewish. The family had fled Spain to escape the Inquisition after one ancestor was burnt at the stake and another subjected to torture. The tortured man was named David Antonio. He managed to hold out long enough to convince his tormentors that he was not a practicing Jew and concocted a plan to escape the country with his family. On a lighter note, he was also a master swordsman, so Mark got to do some swashbuckling. Number 8. Josh Widdicombe is descended from Henry VIII, possibly. Josh Widdicombe's family history journey took him back to Mary Boleyn. She was his 14 times great-grandmother, sister to Anne Boleyn, and mistress of Henry VIII.
My great whatever aunt is Anne Boleyn.
She's also the main character in The Other Boleyn Girl. Many historians believe that Catherine Knollys, Mary's daughter, was also Henry's illegitimate child. Catherine is also Josh's ancestor. As the comedian was very excited to discover, this means he could be a direct descendant of Henry VIII.
She, we know, had a relationship with the king, with King Henry VIII.
No.
Yes. Mary was Henry's mistress.
However, even if this is fake news, Josh still has some royal blood. On the Boleyn side, he can trace his ancestry back to King Henry I, so there's a consolation prize.
Oh my word. King Edward I.
Number 7, Jack Whitehall's unlikable ancestor.
So what happened then?
Well, hopefully they beat him up.
Comedian and actor Jack Whitehall has made a career out of being posh. That is to say, a lot of his comedy involves poking fun at himself and his background. Taking part in Who Do You Think You Are with his dad Michael, Jack hoped to find some ancestors who were a bit more relatable. What he got was Thomas Jones Phillips, a lawyer and, as Jack puts it, a perennial snitch.
Some of the reigning Chartists get put on trial.
Please don't be.
Jones Phillips played a part in opposing the Chartists, a political group who fought for working men to have the vote. During the Newport Uprising, Jack's ancestor tracked down their inspirational leader, John Frost, and turned him in for the reward. His 4 times great-grandson was not impressed.
And in fact, knowing what I know about you and your ancestry, I think going forward, I'm going to have to sever ties with you and focus on Mummy.
Number 6, Patrick Stewart's father suffered from shell shock.
And here he is again in what would have been his Second World War uniform.
When Patrick Stewart agreed to take part in Who Do You Think You Are, he planned to find out about his father's military service. Stewart's childhood home had been marred by domestic violence, but his memories of his father were mixed. He remembered the violent man, but also the exciting war stories his father used to tell. In this deeply personal episode, Stewart wanted to explore and understand the conflicting sides of his father's character.
But in an aerial attack, a nearby bomb explosion gave him shell shock, from which he still suffers.
Over the course of the program, the actor discovered that his father suffered from shell shock. We would now call it PTSD.
We know now that it builds up a level of stress and anger. And of course, what I experienced from 1945 onwards was an angry man.
Yeah.
Who maybe hadn't been angry before.
This discovery gave the actor some new insight into a man who may have been different had he never gone to war. Number 5, Judy Dench's Shakespeare connection. Judy Dench is now a familiar face on the big screen, thanks to film roles in projects such as Shakespeare in Love and Philomena. But primarily, she's a Shakespearean actress. Her first role at the Old Vic Theatre was playing Ophelia in Hamlet.
Better, you might know the English name better, Elsinore.
It's Elsinore?
Yeah, that's...
The play is set in Denmark in the royal castle of Elsinore, where Ophelia lives with her father. While investigating her family history, Dame Judy was shocked to discover that she actually had an ancestor who lived in the real Danish castle. Even better, she turned out to be related to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who were actual characters in the play.
So those were part of his family?
Those were part of his family.
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern?
Exactly.
Who Shakespeare?
It was an emotional discovery for the actress and a fascinating coincidence for the viewer.
Well, maybe the stories that Will Kemp brought back could have been some kind of inspiration to Shakespeare to write about.
Number 4, Alan Cummings' grandfather's real cause of death. actor Alan Cummings investigated a family story that was a bit closer to home. His mother's father, Tom, was killed while serving as a police officer in Malaysia. Supposedly, a gun that he was cleaning backfired.
You don't clean a gun like this, and you don't kill yourself like this.
But when Alan spoke to an old service comrade, he uncovered a different story. His grandfather died from a gun wound to the back of the head.
And that was that he was playing Russian roulette.
The story was he had been playing Russian roulette. Apparently, he was a habitual player. It is suspected that his luck ran out or he got careless. Does this mean he accidentally shot himself? Or did somebody find out he was cheating and have him killed? Either way, it wasn't the story that his grandson expected to find.
I feel really sad for him.
Number 3. Matthew Pinsent, related to God? There have been a few instances of royal ancestors cropping up on Who Do You Think You Are, but the reveal during Matthew Pinsent's episode is one of the most bizarre.
So your direct ancestor is
Edward I.
Yeah.
The Olympic medalist traced his lineage back to the Plantagenet kings. He discovered that he was a direct descendant of Edward I. He was then shown an archaic scroll that follows the line of succession back even further. As the medieval royals were keen to justify their claim to the divine right of kings, the scroll takes some unexpected turns.
There's Jesus. Stop it. Why do they put Jesus on there?
According to this particular document, Matthew is related to Jesus, King David, Adam and Eve, and, right at the very top, God. As he says, that's pretty much as far as you can go.
Matthew is, with certainty, directly descended from kings.
Number 2. Ainsley Harriet's slave-owning ancestors.
So the Harriet was originally a white name then?
Ainsley Harriet's search took him to the Caribbean island of Jamaica, where his father grew up. Although he assumed that his ancestors had been brought to Jamaica as slaves, the TV chef was still in for an unpleasant shock. He discovered that his family name originally came from a white slave owner, his 2 times great-grandfather, James Gordon Harriet.
I need to sit down, this is so sorry.
Ainsley visited the estate where slaves and slave owners, both his distant relatives, once lived. Good or bad, it's part of my makeup, he concluded. The history of the Harriet family really encapsulates the history of the West Indies.
That shows owning slaves went back generations in the Harriet family.
Number 1. Danny Dyer's royal pedigree. Will there ever be an episode like this one? Professional Cockney geezer Danny Dyer didn't expect to find any money in his family tree. At the beginning of his journey, we didn't either. Tragic tales of poverty and the workhouse began the story, but then something remarkable happened. He hit an aristocratic line. After the first breakthrough, they just keep coming.
And I think actually there is more than a passing resemblance.
He learned about Thomas Cromwell, advisor to Henry VIII and his 15 times great-grandfather. He then followed the Seymour line, Cromwell married his son into nobility, and discovered he was directly descended from the Plantagenet kings.
So you are directly descended from King Edward III of England?
Can't be. Can't be.
Among his other direct ancestors, he can count Eleanor of Aquitaine, William the Conqueror, and King Louis IX, who was even canonised as a saint.
That is my 22 times great-grandfather, Edward III, so basically... The king.
King. Let us know in the comments if you've ever researched your ancestry in depth.
This has confirmed that one wrong choice and it could end.